Hi, my name is Lorraine Watry and welcome to my studio. I am a watercolor artist and I've worked with watercolor for 26 years now, and I thought I would start a new series of videos where I go over different tips, tricks, and techniques for working with watercolor. And hopefully these short videos will help you in your journey, and if you have a question or a technique that you would like to see, please comment below and I will try to accommodate that in a future video. Hi, today's watercolor tip video is going to go over how I label my palette. I had a subscriber ask how I do that, and so I have some examples. I have my main palette. I have an extra palette that I keep paints in that I am testing out and may not use very often, and then I have a palette that I use when I go paint on location. And so I have some variety of ways that I will label my palette, and the side palette was the way I used to do things. So I would just use a permanent marker and write the name of the paint on there, and then on a lot of them I would also write what brand or what company makes that paint, so that if I am trying to use that paint or refill it, then I remember which brand. And the reason that you might want to know that is because there can be a difference in what the paint looks like from brand to brand, even if it's the same pigment, just because of how they create the paint. So that is one way, is to label it with a permanent marker. And for Daniel Smith, I just put a DS. If it were a Holbein, I would just write H. I've got one right here that's got an H by it. And then that just reminds me what that pigment is. And I'll try to hold this a little closer so that hopefully it will be viewable. And if I were doing that on a bigger palette, so on this palette, before I changed and went to the labeling system that I'm using now, I would sometimes write the name of the pigment at the top and then also at the side. One of the reasons, if you write it at the top, that doesn't always remain permanent, even if you're using a permanent marker, is because, for instance, there's paint that gets over the edge, or if you clean your palette, that permanent marker will wipe off over time. So it just was good to have it on both the side and the top. And before I go to this one, I will look at my palette that I take when I'm painting on location. And this palette has a tray that sits over in here. This is a Mielo palette. And so what I did was I took a picture of the palette with my phone camera, and then I printed that off. And so then I just took that print and used some packing tape, and used the packing tape to basically seal that, so that even if the palette has got paint on it or is wet, it's easily cleanable. Now, one problem with this is if you're painting and you put paint in here, then you're having to try to hold this up over your head to be able to see what your colors are if you can't remember. And there are times with this palette that I have to look because I don't use it very often, and so sometimes some of the colors can look very similar once they're dry in your palette. And you can try, I don't know if I have it in here, you can try to write with a permanent marker on some of these little wells, and I do have some. I don't know if it's going to be viewable. I do have a little bit of writing on here, but it's got so much paint over it now. I can see, like, this one is probably the cleanest, and it says ultramarine or ultraviolet right there. So you can do that as well, but again, if it gets paint on there or it gets cleaned and rubs off. And then for my palette that I take in the field, I use a piece of press and seal over it to try to hold the pieces of paint in there, because they do dry and then they will pop out sometimes. Now that can work, but this press and seal is so old now that it's not really holding well, and I'm having issues when I go to take it out of my bag. Then I'm having to figure out where they go again. So yeah, sometimes it's better just to carry your palette flat rather than tip it up. And the other option would be you could paste or tape your list of colors onto the surface of the palette as well. So you have a couple options for that. So we'll move this one. And to go to the palette that I use in the studio and that is using my new method is to, you can probably see it on my side camera there, is to take the chart from the brand of watercolor that I have in my palette, and I find that particular color and then cut it out and put it on the side. So each of these paints has the information for that paint right next to it. And in the corners of this palette, it can get a little messy. So depending on your palette and what you're using, you just kind of figure out your own system and what makes sense for you. So what I have found, though, is the different brands of watercolor will put out a chart, and generally they look something like this. And the paper that is used is generally pretty thick. And this is an older Daniel Smith chart. They have a lot more colors than this, and so these are bigger than what I have on my palette. But I decided that making a copy of this, or and I'll explain the other method in a second, you can find them online. And so this is a Holbein chart, and you can see this one, same kind of thing. It's got the thicker paper, and whoops. It opens up and has their list of colors in there. And then this is Sennelier, and it has information in their chart, and then in the back it has their colors and some information for them as well. So the way that I now do it is I go online, and in order to be able to close my palette, this palette comes with a lid, and I have it over here, but it's underneath something. So, and in order for the lid to go and fit over this, the labels cannot be too thick. And also because I cover them with tape to keep them somewhat clean, I need them to be thinner. So basically I go online and I search for the brand of paint that I'm using, and I have mostly Daniel Smith on my palette, but then I have about 5 or 6 Holbein pigments. And so I look, for instance, I type in on Google Daniel Smith watercolor chart and PDF. So the PDF is a file, if you haven't used those before, that you can basically print from. And so I found the Daniel Smith chart, and depending on how your printer prints and all of that, you may have to print it off in pieces, or you may be able to print, be able to reduce the chart so that you can print it. So that is what I do now, and you can see I've cut colors out of these, and the paper in my printer is thinner than what the paper is on the brochures. And then I have a Holbein printout for some of the colors from there, and I think that was it. So I have a color on my palette now. I have the Phthalo blue turquoise, and there is a Phthalo turquoise. So this is a new pigment that that Daniel Smith came out with, the Phthalo blue turquoise, and it's not on their chart yet. So I wanted to go ahead and label my palette. So you can see over here I have an opening that I don't have the information for that color, and so I'm going to make my own basic color swatch, color chart label. And just so you can see what this color is, I have a little bit of the Phthalo blue turquoise here, And this is its darker value, so you can see it. It's a, whoops, it's a very pretty turquoisey color and kind of leaning a little more toward green. And I do have a video that was talking about the phthalo blue turquoise and comparing it to some other turquoise colors on my palette, and that I decided to remove the manganese that I used to have here, and I replaced it with a phthalo blue turquoise. So that's what it looks like. And then what I've decided to do, since it's not on their chart yet, is to go ahead and make my own label. And I did a little test of how I wanted to write it out, and the pen I was using was just a touch thick, and so I'm going to just write it up right quick. And I'm following the same information that they have on, Daniel Smith has on their other labels. And so I just want to have a little bit of the color up there so that it reminds me if I forget what it looks like. And because this is on printer paper, if I were doing something very wet, putting a lot of color on there, then I would probably get lots of buckling. This is not going to be the exact color, just because of the fact that the paper does not have any sizing in it. And then I have a pen from, I believe this is, this is Uniball, and it's a number 207, so it has a nice thin tip to it. And so I'm going to write the series, and the series is, I'll zoom in right quick so you can see this better. Okay, so I have zoomed in, and you can see the color swatch that I laid down. And now I'm going to start writing the same information that Daniel Smith would put on their chart. And the series number, which is off to the left on their chart, for each color, that is the price range. So a 1 is the least expensive, and then I believe they go up to a 4 for their most expensive. And most of theirs are 1s and 2s, and then they do have some that are 3s, but so this pigment is a 2. And then I'll put the color name under it. Phthalo blue, and I'm not going to be able to write as small as the other ones, but it'll work. And so I have the full name, and then this pigment is PB16, and I don't think there's any other pigment in this. I think it's a single pigment. So I put PB16, and then the other information is that it is a 1 in their light fast rating. And all of the charts that I have found will have a key. So this one has the information. It says color information from left to right, and it has what size tubes. And this is Daniel Smith's way of doing it, so different brands will do different things. It has the light fast rating list, and so it goes from a 1 down to a 4. A 1 is excellent, and 100 plus years is what it should last and not fade off of your paper. And then a 4 would be fugitive. So those paints maybe only last 15 to 20 years before it could fade. So I only have on my palette 1s and 2s. And then they do have some that say NR, which means not rated. And there's a association that rates the paints. And then it has non-staining or low staining or high staining. So that would be a 1 to a 4. And is it granular, meaning does it have lots of little pigments and things? So on their chart, you can see this color, Lunar Violet, is granular. And then is it transparent or opaque? And so it has a range in there, and that's how they label theirs. And then different companies will have different keys, so you just kind of need to look at those keys. So this pigment is a 1. It is a 3 in staining. It is not granular, and it is transparent. So, oops, put my little dot there. So now I have all that information, and I'm just going to quickly cut it out. So you could do this for all of your pigments that you have on your palette. If you don't have a printer, or you just want to write up the information yourself, or maybe like for this color, it doesn't have the information available on a chart yet. I did find from Daniel Smith the information online, so that's where I found that to be able to fill in that label, but it's not on their chart yet that I could find. Okay, so I have my piece of packing tape ready, and packing tape is a little thick as well, so you could also use double-sided tape, or you could use just regular clear tape. All right, and then once I get it on there, just go ahead and lift this up just a little bit and put it in place. And this palette is a little curved here, so I do work around that. Now, one of the things with this labeling system is you can see that some paint has gotten under here, and it's kind of messy looking over time. So, you know, there may be a better way to put the color on, or put the label on, and not have something get under it. It really just kind of depends. And then over here on this edge, let's see if I can show it in both cameras. Oh, nope. I can show it. Oh, okay, sort of get it. So here the label is kind of rolling down and my tape is coming undone. So it's not perfect, but it gives me a lot of information, which I really appreciate when I'm painting, because while I know the characteristics of a lot of my pigments, there are times when either I'm teaching a class or just for myself, I can't remember if something is staining or granular, and so it can help to have that information on my palette. And so now that I have this information here, I know this is a single pigment, it is light fast, and it is on the staining side of things, and it is transparent. So that can be really helpful, and I hope this video was helpful for you, and you'll get your palette labeled, because it really can make a difference when you are learning your colors and how things work together. One last thing is that you might have noticed I have some X's on some of the tops of my paints on this palette, and that is because there are some pigments on my palette that are more than a single pigment. So this is, let's see, this is green gold, and green gold has 3 pigments in this paint. So I try to have mostly single pigments on my palette, but there are some colors that I really like, and I just mark it with an X to remind me that when I'm going to make a mix, I need to remember that there are already 3 pigments in some of these colors, and that I can't mix too many other colors with them, or I might end up with something kind of blah and what people tend to call mud. So that is something to note, and I hope you give this labeling system a try, or one of these labeling systems a try, and I will see you next week. If you have a tip, trick, or technique that you would like to see in watercolor, please leave a comment below and I will add it to my list. Thanks, and have a good day. Bye.